Welcome back to the Chapter Café, the coziest corner of the literary world, where the stories are warm, the mugs are full, and the world outside can stay as chilly as it wants. I'm Kristen, your host, your reading companion, and your fellow wanderer through the pages that keep us company through the seasons. Today we're leaning into the final stretch of winter, that liminal moment when the snow feels ancient, the nights feel long, and folklore seems to breathe just a little closer to our world. It's the perfect time to explore a book that blends myth, horror, grief, and longing into something atmospheric and unforgettable. We're diving into a lore series, A Wendigo Invites Us to Dinner, and I Spoke to the Guard of Hades by Cy Sykes Kanaan. This two-story collection introduces readers to a world where ancient beings step into contemporary settings, where the wilderness and the underworld feel equally alive, and where human emotions of fear, hunger, grief, and devotion become the true heart of the story. Both tales are described as bizarre stories full of mystery, myths, legend, and true horror for the modern era, and they absolutely deliver on that promise. But what makes them especially compelling is how they pair with the season. Late winter is a time of introspection, of shadow and light, of craving stories that feel older than the cold itself. And this book, it's exactly that kind of read. So grab your warmest drink, settle into your favorite chair, and let's step into the folklore-rich world of Cy Sykes Kanaan. A lore series is designed as an ongoing exploration of myth and horror, with each installment focusing on a different legendary figure or supernatural encounter. This volume contains two stories that feels like companion pieces, not because they share characters or settings, but because they explore the same emotional terrain from different angles. Kanaan's writing sits comfortably within the modern resurgence of myth-based horror. Over the last decade, readers have gravitated towards stories that reimagine folklore through contemporary lenses. Works like Stephen Graham Jones's The Only Good Indians, which uses indigenous horror to explore guilt and generational trauma, or Adam Neville's The Ritual, which blends wilderness survival with Norse mythology. Kanaan's work belongs in that conversation. It's atmospheric, emotionally charged, and deeply rooted in the cultural origins of the myths that it explores. What makes this book particularly interesting is its structure. The first story, A Wendigo Invites Us to Dinner, is fast-paced, physical, and terrifying, a survival horror story set in the snowy wilderness. The second, I Spoke to the Guard of Hades, is slow, introspective, and mythic, a grief-driven descent into the underworld. Together they create a kind of emotional duet, fear and longing, hunger and devotion, the cold of the mountains and the chill of the afterlife. This duality is what gives the book its power. It's not just a horror collection, it's a meditation on what drives us, what haunts us, and what we're willing to face when the world grows dark. The first story follows two couples who head to the Rocky Mountains for a romantic winter getaway. Their plans unravel almost immediately when a brutal car crash leaves them stranded in a remote woodland. Injured, isolated, and surrounded by miles of snow, they quickly realize that they're not alone. Something ancient is watching them, something hungry. The Wendigo, in Kanaan's telling, is not just a creature lurking in the woods. It is described as an ancient and non-negotiable evil that roams the wilds, a presence that feels inevitable, like winter itself. The couple's attempts to survive become increasingly desperate as the Wendigo closes in and the story becomes a tense, claustrophobic exploration of fear, hunger, and the unraveling of human relationships under pressure. To understand the depth of this story, it helps to know of the cultural origins of the Wendigo. The creature comes from the folklore of Algonquin-speaking tribes. In these traditions, the Wendigo is often associated with cannibalism taboos, a warning against consuming human flesh even in desperation, winter starvation myths, such as when the Wendigo often appears during times of famine, when hunger threatens to override morality, and spiritual imbalance, as the creature represents greed, excess, and the loss of humanity. Anthropologist Basil Johnston describes the Wendigo as a spirit of insatiable hunger, a being that grows larger the more it consumes, forever starving and forever seeking. It is both a literal monster and a metaphor for the dangers of unchecked desire, whether that desire is for food, power, or survival at any cost. Kanaan's story honors this tradition. The Wendigo is not portrayed as a simple predator, but as a force of nature, a manifestation of the characters' deepest fears. The wilderness itself seems to bend around it. The cold grows sharper, the silence heavier, and the shadows deeper. The snowy wilderness becomes a character in its own right. Snow muffles sounds, erases tracks, and creates a sense of timelessness. The couples are cut off from the world with no cell service, no roads, and no help. This isolation amplifies their every emotion. Fear becomes sharper, arguments become more heated, and hope becomes fragile. One of the most powerful elements of the Wendigo folklore is the idea that anyone can become one. Hunger, desperation, and fear can transform a person into something unrecognizable. Kanaan leans into this psychological horror. As the characters struggle to survive, they begin to question not just the creature stalking them, but themselves. What would they do to live, and what lines are they willing to cross? At the beginning of the story, the characters are friends, but the wilderness soon strips away their social masks. Resentments surface, loyalties shift, and the Wendigo becomes a catalyst for emotional unraveling, revealing the fractures already present in their relationship. The second story shifts dramatically in tone. Instead of a frantic fight for survival, we follow a grieving widower who is desperate to bring back the love he has lost. His journey leads him to the Guard of Hades, a mythic figure who stands between the living and the dead. The story is quieter and more introspective. It is less about terror and more about longing, the kind of longing that aches in your bones. His grief is palpable, and his willingness to cross boundaries, both literal and spiritual, become the emotional core of the narrative. In Greek mythology, the underworld is a complex realm with multiple guardians and gatekeepers, including Cerberus, the three-headed hound who prevents souls from escaping, Charon, the ferryman who transports souls across the river Styx, and Thanatos, the personification of peaceful death who guides souls gently into the afterlife. Kanaan's Guard of Hades appears to be an amalgamation of these figures, part protector, part judge, and part companion to the grieving. This blending allows the story to explore the underworld not just as a place of punishment, but as a realm of memory, longing, and difficult choices. His descent into the underworld echoes the story of Orpheus and Eurydice, a tale of love so powerful it defies death. But unlike Orpheus, who fails because he looks back, Kanaan's protagonist faces a different kind of test, the willingness to accept what cannot be changed. The story asks a difficult question. What would you give to undo a loss? And if you could, should you? The Guard of Hades becomes a moral compass, challenging the widow to confront the consequences of his desire. Even gods and guardians can feel the weight of eternity. The guard is portrayed not as a cold, distant figure, but as someone who understands grief intimately. This adds emotional depth to the story and creates a sense of connection between the mortal and the divine. Though the stories differ in setting, tone, and mythological roots, they share a deep emotional resonance. Both stories explore what drives us when we are pushed to our limits. In the first, it is fear and survival, and in the second, grief and devotion. Both stories ask, what does it mean to be human when the world grows dark? They also share a fascination with boundaries, the boundary between civilization and wilderness, between life and death, and between those who are and whom we might become. These boundaries are fragile, permeable, and often crossed at great cost. Together, the stories create a thematic arc, from the hunger that consumes us to the longing that defines us. Late winter is a season of contrast. The days are slowly lengthening, but the nights still feel deep. The cold lingers, but hints of spring begin to whisper at the edges. It is a time of introspection, of craving stories that feel ancient and atmospheric. This book fits that mood perfectly. The Wendigo story taps into the primal fear of winter, hunger, isolation, the vastness of the wilderness, while the Hades story taps into the emotional quiet of the season, the longing, reflection, and sense of standing on the threshold between darkness and light. Together, they create a reading experience that feels tailor-made for this moment in the year. As the cafe lights dim and the winter wind rushes past the windows, the lore series reminds us that myths aren't just stories. They're reflections of our deepest fears and desires. They help us understand ourselves, our relationships, and the shadows we carry. So whether you're drawn to the icy terror of the Wendigo or the aching beauty of the underworld, Cy Sykes Kanaan offers a collection that lingers like a shadow at the edge of the firelight. Thank you for spending this cozy, myth-soaked time with me. Until next time, keep your mug warm, your stories close, and your heart open to the lore that lives between the pages.